Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unset Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Story 1. I live in Hollywood, Florida. Not the postcard version people imagine. Not the beach, not the clean hotels or tourist spots. I'm talking about the West Side, around that stretch between Sheridan and Sterling, where everything feels worn down and half forgotten. Strip malls that never fully fill up. Laundromats with flickering lights. Vape shops next to empty storefronts with paper still taped over the windows from years ago. Old plazas with sun-bleached signs advertising businesses that don't exist anymore. The kind of place you drive past every day without ever really seeing it. About 3 months ago, something changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No grand opening, no construction noise, no coming soon banners. One day, one of those dead units in a small plaza off North 56th Avenue just wasn't dead anymore. It had been empty for years. Before that, I think it was a tax office. The windows had been covered in brown paper so long it felt permanent, like part of the building itself. Then one morning it was gone. In its place was an ice cream parlor, bright pastel walls, pink neon glowing in the window. Everything looked freshly painted, spotless, almost unnatural against everything else around it. The sign above the door read, "Jack's Ice Cream Parlor, you deserve." A treat, something about that slogan stuck with me immediately. I couldn't explain why. It just felt off. Too personal, too certain. At first, I assumed I'd just missed the setup. Maybe they renovated overnight. Maybe I hadn't been paying attention. But when I asked around, nobody had seen anything either. No crews, no deliveries. No permits posted in the window. It had just appeared, and people were already going there, not crowds. That's what made it stranger. It was steady, a constant trickle. Moms with kids, older couples, teenagers still in school clothes, guys in work uniforms stopping by before heading home. Always someone walking out with a cone or a cup, like it had always been part of the neighborhood. I told myself it was probably some trendy place. South Florida gets those all the time. Some viral dessert spot that pops up out of nowhere and spreads through TikTok before anyone even realizes it exists. Then the ads started. At first I noticed one on a bus bench along Hollywood Boulevard. Same pastel colors, same smiling cartoon ice cream man with round red cheeks and an exaggerated grin that showed too many teeth. You deserve a treat. Then I saw flyers stapled to poles near Young Circle. Then ads looping on those tiny screens at gas pumps. Then coupons stuffed into those cheap mailers nobody reads. Always the same colors, the same face, the same words. It felt less like advertising and more like repetition, like something trying to make sure it sank in. The commercial is what really stuck with me. I was half asleep on my couch one night, TV on in the background, not really watching anything. It must have been around 10, maybe later. The kind of time where everything feels slightly unreal already. Then the screen shifted. The image quality looked wrong immediately. Not retro on purpose, not stylized. Actually old, like it had been recorded on tape decades ago and never updated. A man stood behind a counter, smiling directly into the camera. White uniform, bow tie, small paper hat. The kind of outfit you'd expect from an ice cream shop in the 1950s. But it wasn't the outfit that bothered me. It was his face. His eyes were wide, too focused, like he wasn't just looking at the camera, he was looking through it. His smile stretched unnaturally far, showing too much gum, too many teeth. Not forced exactly, more like it had been held there for so long it forgot how to relax. Kids sat around him eating sundaes while a soft, looping jingle played in the background. Bad day? Bad thoughts? You deserve a treat. Come on down to Jack's Ice Cream Parlor. There's a flavor for everyone. His voice was low and smooth, but there was something wrong with the rhythm. Like he wasn't pausing to breathe, every word slid into the next without stopping. Then he leaned forward slightly, from butterscotch to bubblegum, sour balls, and cherry blasters. The camera began to zoom in. The kids disappeared from focus. The sound behind him faded. The music cut out mid-note. The background shifted, flickering between pale blue, pink, and yellow in slow pulses. Fast as fast can be, he said softly. He lifted a cone into frame. Vanilla, perfect swirl, lickety-split. The smile widened just a little more. Then it cut to black. No address, no phone number, nothing. Just the words. Jack's Ice Cream, you deserve a treat. I remember laughing it off at the time. It felt weird, sure, but in a cheap, local commercial kind of way. That same week, the truck started showing up. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I started noticing the timing. Every hour. Not roughly. Not sometimes. Every hour. I live near Taft Street. It's usually noisy in a chaotic way. Dogs barking, people arguing through thin walls, engines revving at odd hours. But now, layered on top of all that, there was something else. A soft melody. An ice cream tune, but slower than usual. Almost gentle. There was something oddly sad about it, like it was dragging behind itself. Every time I heard it, I'd look out the window. And there it was. A white truck, clean in a way that didn't match anything around it, moving slowly down the street. Kids would come running. But not just kids. Adults too. Grown men and women stepping out of their apartments, barefoot, standing in driveways or near the curb. Waiting quietly. Not talking, just watching the truck approach. The driver was always the same. The man from the commercial. One afternoon I went down. I didn't plan to. I didn't even decide consciously. I just did it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the smell. Because by then, I had started noticing that too. Vanilla. Not the artificial kind. Something deeper, richer, sweet enough to make your teeth ache just from breathing it in. The truck stopped under the streetlight outside my building. The music kept playing, soft and steady. He leaned out of the window and looked directly at me. Not past me. Not generally in my direction. At me. Rough day? He asked, and it had been. Nothing dramatic, just everything at once. Work stress, rent creeping up again. My ex posting pictures with someone new, the usual noise from upstairs. I gave a small laugh. Yeah, he nodded slowly, like he understood more than I'd said. The world can be ugly, he said. Then, almost gently, you deserve a treat. He handed me a cone, vanilla, perfect swirl. It wasn't melting, not even a little. I asked how much. He smiled. Kindness pays for kindness. It sounded corny, scripted, but I took it anyway. And when I tasted it, it's hard to explain. It wasn't just good. It wasn't just the best ice cream I'd ever had. It felt familiar, like something I'd forgotten I missed. It was cold, but not freezing. Sweet, but not overwhelming. Each bite felt like it carried something else with it. A memory almost remembered. A moment you can't quite place, but somehow recognize. For a few seconds, everything in my head went quiet. Not gone, just muted. Like someone turned the volume down on every problem at once. I felt okay. Not excited, not euphoric, just okay. The man watched me the entire time. Then he said very softly, "Now you see it." The feeling vanished almost immediately after that. I looked up at him. See what? But he had already pulled back. He tipped his hat, still smiling, and drove off. That's when things started changing. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just gradually. The next morning, I went to Publix on Sheridan. In the parking lot, I saw a mother yank her kid so hard by the arm, the girl stumbled and nearly hit the ground. The kid started crying. The mother didn't even look down. A guy nearby laughed. It shouldn't have stuck with me, but it did. Later that day, I saw a dead iguana on the sidewalk. It had probably been there for hours, maybe longer. Ants had already found it, moving in and out of its eye socket. People walked around it without looking. At work, conversations started sounding different. Not the words themselves. The intent, people smiling at each other, then immediately tearing each other apart the moment the other person left the room. Not casual gossip, not venting. Something sharper, colder. I started noticing homeless people more too, not in a sympathetic way, in a detailed way. The infections, the smell, the way people physically flinched when they got too close, like they were avoiding something contagious. It kept building. A teenager filming an old man who had fallen outside Walmart instead of helping him up. A couple screaming at each other in a car while their kid cried in the back seat. A woman hitting her dog hard enough to make it yelp, then looking around to see if anyone noticed. It was like something had peeled back a layer of the world. And underneath it, there was no softness, no patience, no real kindness. Just people tolerating each other until they didn't have to. Through all of it, the truck kept coming. Every hour, the same song, the same smell, the same man. And slowly, I started noticing something else. People repeating the slogan. Not on purpose. Coworkers saying, "You deserve a treat," in conversations where it didn't fit. Neighbors muttering it under their breath. I saw wrappers in storm drains. Pink napkins caught in fences. Melted cones abandoned on benches. It felt like it was spreading, like it was settling into the city. Last week I went to the parlor. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted that feeling again. It looked normal from the outside. Families at tables, kids laughing, music playing, the neon sign glowing softly. But something felt off even before I went in. The people outside weren't really interacting. They were sitting close together, but not talking, just eating. Slowly, I opened the door. I heard the hum of a freezer, the faint buzz of lights. Then I stepped inside, and everything stopped. The sound cut out completely. No hum, no music, nothing. The room was empty. No families, no kids, just the counter. And him, standing behind it. Same uniform, same smile, but up close, it looked strained, like it had been held in place too long. "Welcome," he said brightly. "What can I get you?" I didn't answer that. I asked him what was happening to me. He didn't react right away. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Nothing is happening to you," he said. "This is how it's always been." He gestured toward the window. I turned. Through the glass, I could see the people outside again. Sitting, eating, smiling. But now it felt wrong, like I was watching something through a delay. "Most people need help ignoring it," he continued. "That's what ice cream is for." I asked him what the ice cream actually was. For the first time, his expression changed. Not much, just a small twitch. And for a split second, he looked tired, like I had asked something obvious, something pointless. Before he could answer, a sound cut through the silence. Crying. Not normal crying, deep, raw, almost animal. I turned toward the window again. There was a little boy sitting alone at one of the tables, a melted sundae in front of him, tears streaming down his face. But there was no sound coming from him now. His mouth was open, shaking, but silent. No one around him reacted. No one looked. No one cared. The boy lifted his head slowly, looked straight at me, and mouthed one word. "Please." Something in me snapped. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran out the door, the bell above it ringing too loudly in the silence. As I pushed outside, the sound came back all at once. The music, the voices, the normal noise. Behind me, I heard laughter. Low, smooth, unbroken. I haven't gone back since. But the truck still comes, every hour. And now, when I hear the music, I don't just see things. I understand them. Couples who don't love each other. Parents who regret their kids. Friends waiting for the right moment to turn. People watching suffering like it's entertainment. Everyone pretending. Because pretending is easier. Last night, I looked out my window. The truck was parked directly below. There were about 12 people standing around it. Pajamas, slippers, bare feet on concrete. No one spoke. They just waited. One by one, he handed them cones. Each person took it quietly and walked away. No thanks, no conversation, just acceptance. When the last person left, the truck didn't move. It stayed there, idling. The music still playing, softer now. I was 4 floors up, but I could see him clearly. He was already looking at me. That same smile, unchanged. On the side of the truck, I noticed more words than before, painted in the same pastel colors. There's a flavor for everyone's misery. You deserve a treat, fast as fast can be. I couldn't look away, and even from that distance, I could see his lips move, slowly, carefully, lickety-split. 2. David found Sentinel Ridge on a camping forum 3 weeks before we went. 4.5 stars, glowing reviews, people raving about the Douglas firs and the creek trails and how remote it felt without being difficult to get to. We'd been trying to squeeze in more trips with Emma before she hit the age where she'd rather die than spend a weekend in a tent with her parents. She was 9 years old. We had maybe 2 summers left. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was still high, but the trees were already casting long, soft shadows across the parking lot. The visitor center was quiet, almost empty. A ranger in a faded green shirt sat behind the desk, barely looking up from her clipboard. She gave us our permits without asking many questions, pointed us toward the laminated trail map on the wall, and told us the NE zones were the most scenic. We were registered for NE5, 4 miles north in the Douglas fir line. 3 nights, she said, with the same flat tone someone uses when they're used to reciting the same line over and over. Murphy was in the back seat for the whole drive. Our 6-year-old golden retriever, veteran of at least 40 trails. More nights in a tent than most people I knew. He was the kind of dog who's settled into wilderness like it was a second skin. He'd circle a new campsite once, sniff the edges, and then plant himself by the fire ring until morning. He was calm the entire first afternoon. Calm right through dinner, where Emma actually read until 9 without being asked twice to turn the light off. He circled the campsite once when we arrived, the way he always did at every new site, then went directly to the fire ring and slept. It was a good evening, the kind of quiet, simple evening you only realize later was the last one you had before everything changed. The air was cool, but not cold. The fire popped gently. Emma's voice was soft when she read, and David kept refilling his mug of coffee without saying anything, just leaning back in his chair and watching the light on the trees. I remember thinking, for no particular reason, that this would be one of the memories Emma would carry into her teenage years, even if she pretended not to remember it later. I was asleep by 11. Murphy was at the foot of my sleeping bag, curled into a familiar knot of fur and warmth. The tent zipper was closed. The flap over the door was pulled down. I could still hear the faint sound of the creek a few yards away, a steady, low murmur. At 2:14 a.m., by my phone's clock, Emma was outside our tent. "Mum," she said. Her voice was flat, half asleep, like she was still talking inside a dream. "There's someone calling my name." I sat up immediately. David was already awake next to me, which meant he'd heard something too. The inside of the tent was dark, but the faint glow of his phone screen showed his face already turned toward the door. Murphy was standing at the tent zip, front paws braced, ears forward, nose pressed into the gap, wanting out. "What do you mean?" I kept my voice lower than I felt, trying to keep it steady. "In the trees," she said, pointing north. "Someone keeps saying my name." David unzipped the tent and stepped out, his bear canister banging against his pack as he moved. Emma followed a step behind, barefoot on the pine needles. Murphy pushed past us without waiting, his tail low, body moving straight toward the tree line on the north side of the campsite. He didn't sniff the ground. He didn't circle. He just walked up to the edge of the trees and sat down, staring into the dark. David walked the perimeter with his torch on full beam. He went 30 feet in each direction, scanning the space between the trees, calling out once in a low, firm voice, "Hello? Is someone there?" The sound came back to us softer, swallowed by the trees. Nothing answered. No crack of a branch. No rustle. No movement. He came back after a few minutes, the beam of his light cutting through the dark as he approached. "There's nobody out there," he said, his voice louder than it had to be, like he was trying to fill the silence. Emma nodded. She was 9, cold, tired, and clearly wanting that to be true. She didn't argue. She just turned and went back to her tent, the zipper closing behind her with a soft sound that felt too loud in the quiet. Murphy didn't come back to his spot at the foot of my sleeping bag. He stayed where he was, sitting on the north edge of the campsite, facing the tree line, his body still and alert. He didn't move once for the rest of the night. The second day was harder to enjoy, even though we tried. We did a shorter trail, sticking to the creek loop, instead of heading deeper into the ridge. Emma was quiet most of the morning, not sullen, not angry, but withdrawn in a way that made me check her forehead more than once, even though she didn't have a fever. Murphy walked at our heels instead of ranging ahead like he usually did, his head up, eyes constantly flicking toward the north. Every time we stopped to look at a rock or a bird or a patch of wildflowers, he turned and stayed facing that direction until I called him back, and even then he moved slowly, as if something were pulling him. By mid-afternoon, something had changed in the air. I noticed it first, at the creek while we were filtering water. I was kneeling on a flat stone, the pump in my hand, the plastic bottle in the other, and then I smelled it. Organic and heavy and deeply wrong. Something I couldn't name, couldn't place, couldn't even say whether it was animal or plant. It didn't come from one direction. It felt like it was in the air itself, just hanging there, faint but undeniable. I didn't say anything to David. I was still trying to convince myself I was making something out of nothing, but telling myself it was just a dead animal buried in the undergrowth somewhere. But then I looked up. David was standing a few feet away, his own water bottle half filled, listening to something I couldn't hear. He went quiet, mid-sentence at dinner that evening, the way people do when they notice something and aren't sure whether to mention it. He looked up into the trees, then at Murphy, then at me, and his shoulders tensed slightly. "Yeah," he said, after a moment, when I asked him what was wrong. "Probably something dead in the undergrowth," he said, but the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe it. Murphy wasn't eating his dinner. He usually finished his food in under 4 minutes, no matter the conditions. Rain, mud, rocky ground, altitude, none of it slowed him down. That night, he just sat at the north edge of the campsite, his dish of food untouched, staring into the trees like he was waiting for something. Emma ate quietly with her usual appetite and didn't mention the smell. I thought at the time she hadn't noticed it. I think now she had, and she already knew what it was, or at least what it meant, even if neither of us could admit it out loud. She went to her tent at 8:30, No asking to stay up a little longer. No complaint about being tired. Just good night, and the zipper closing. David and I sat with the fire, the sky darkening above us, the smell still faint in the air, like a layer of something rotting just out of sight. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Murphy sat at the north edge of the campsite and didn't come back when David called him, even though he always came when called. I understood somewhere below conscious thought that we were leaving in the morning. At 1:08 a.m., Emma unzipped her tent again. "Mum," she said, the same flat voice, the same tone she'd used hours earlier. "She's there again." I was out of my sleeping bag before she finished speaking. David was right behind me, his boots half on, half off, his flashlight already in his hand. The inside of the tent felt smaller, closer, the air suddenly heavier than it had been. "She?" I asked. Emma pointed north, toward the tree line. I aimed my torch at the trees. The beam cut through the dark for maybe 50 feet before the density of undergrowth and roots and the tall Douglas firs stopped it. The light caught ferns, low branches, the occasional exposed root, but nothing else. No figure, no shape, nothing that shouldn't be there. Emma was still staring at that spot, her small frame rigid, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "She's in the trees," she said. "She's saying my name." "Emma," David said, crouching down to her eye level, his voice softer than he usually let it be. "There's nobody there." She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the trees. "She's there," she said. "She sounds like me." David went out to the tree line, his beam sweeping across the ground, widening as he walked. Murphy stayed where he was, his tail low, his body still. Emma's hand stayed on his back, as if she needed something solid to hold onto. I stood in the campsite with my 9-year-old daughter, and the fire, reduced to embers, and the smell heavier than it had been all evening. And I listened to David walking the perimeter in the dark, and finding nothing. And I made a decision. He came back after a few minutes, his breath a little faster than normal, his shirt dark with sweat at the back. "Nothing," he said. "We're leaving at first light," I said. He looked at me. He could see it wasn't a discussion. He nodded once, slowly, the way he did when he knew arguing would only waste time. Emma was still looking at the tree line. "She wants me to follow her," she said without turning around. The sentence landed like a stone. "You're not going to," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "I know," she said. "I just wanted you to know." She went back to her tent and zipped it, the sound clean and final. David and I didn't sleep. The dark inside the tent felt different now, like the absence of light was something active instead of just empty. Sat between our tent and Emma's, facing north, his body still, his ears twitching at every small sound in the trees. When one of us shifted, he didn't look back. He just stayed fixed on that direction, as if he were guarding it instead of us. We started breaking camp at 5:30 a.m. The sky was still dark, the first hints of gray just starting to show at the horizon. The air was cold enough to make our breath visible. By 7:15, we were on the trail south, packs heavier than they'd felt the day before, even though we hadn't added anything. The path was narrow, the canopy closing in above us, and the trees felt closer than they had on the way in, like they were leaning in. At 8:40, a ranger came up the trail going north and stopped when he saw us coming down. He was in his 60s, lean, with a gray beard and a face that had spent decades in the sun. He carried himself with the easy balance of someone who had walked this kind of trail for most of his life. His shoulders were set in a way that spoke of long hours under a pack, and his eyes were tired but alert. He looked at our packs, at our faces, at Murphy walking tight against Emma's leg, tail low, eyes still half turned north, and something shifted in his expression. "How long were you up there?" he asked. 2 nights, David answered before I could, his voice a little rough from not having spoken much since we woke. The ranger looked at Emma. She was watching the trail ahead, watching her feet, not looking at him directly, not meeting his eyes. "You're coming out," he said, and it wasn't a question. The way he said it carried the weight of something he'd said many times before, and something he'd said many times after people who didn't come back. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was doing an internal calculation and didn't like the result. "Good call," he said, the words heavy with meaning he didn't explain. He went past us and kept going north. I looked back after we'd covered another 30 yards. He was standing in the middle of the trail, still watching us go. His expression the kind of tired sadness of someone who had done the math many times and knew exactly what it would have meant if we hadn't chosen that moment. We made it out. Emma slept the whole drive home, curled against the window, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since we'd left the house. She hasn't mentioned it since, not once. Murphy still faces north sometimes when we take him to the park near our house. When the light changes at the end of the day, he'll find north and stand there, staring into the trees like he's listening to something, his tail going still, his ears forward. I call him inside immediately, and he comes but slowly, like he's leaving something unfinished. We haven't been camping since. Story 3. I'm not exactly an expert on imaginary friends, but even I can tell you they're supposed to be imaginary. That's what I kept telling myself when my daughter first started talking about hers. She'd mention her like it was the most normal thing in the world. Casual, cheerful, completely certain. She told me about the games they played after school, the adventures they had while I was at work, the little routines they apparently shared like old friends. Tea parties on the living room rug, hopscotch in the driveway, dress up in her room with plastic jewelry and tangled bows and all the costume junk we'd bought over the years and sworn we should probably throw out. Most of it sounded exactly like the kind of thing a little kid would make up when she was lonely or bored or trying to make sense of something she didn't have words for yet. A few details didn't really fit. Hide and seek, for one. I remember standing at the kitchen sink while she told me all about it, smiling and nodding like a good father, while my brain quietly snagged on that one part. How do you hide from someone you can't see? How do you seek someone who was never there to begin with? But kids say weird things. Their logic works differently. I told myself not to overthink it, and I had every reason not to. 2 weeks before she started talking about this friend of hers, we had buried her dog, Maxie. He was a small mutt with crooked ears and too much energy, the kind of dog that never stopped moving unless he was asleep in a patch of sunlight. He followed my daughter everywhere, slept outside her bedroom door, waited by the table during dinner, even though he knew he wasn't supposed to. If she was in the yard, he was in the yard. If she was in her room, he scratched at the door until someone let him in. He adored her. She adored him more. We never told her what actually happened. I was rushing to work that morning, already late, already irritated. Coffee in one hand, keys in the other. I backed out without checking behind me as carefully as I should have. There was a soft thump I felt more than heard. I knew instantly. Even now, I still think that was the worst moment of my life. Not the funeral, not the lying. That exact second, sitting frozen behind the wheel, knowing what I had done before I was even brave enough to open the car door. My wife handled most of it after that because I could barely function. We buried him near the back fence under the jacaranda tree. I couldn't stop staring at the patch of fresh dirt. She kept asking what we were going to tell our daughter, and I kept saying, "Not that. anything but that. So we lied. We told her Maxie had run away. We told her we were looking for him. We told her we had put up flyers and that maybe someone kind had found him and he'd come home soon. It was a terrible lie, the kind adults tell because they can't stand the thought of seeing a child's heart break from the truth. We dressed it up as mercy. Maybe part of it was. Most of it was cowardice. At first, the lie seemed to work. She cried, of course, asked about him for a few days, wondered whether he was scared or hungry, slept with one of his old toys tucked under her arm. Then gradually, she stopped bringing him up. That should have relieved me. Instead, it made me feel worse. Not because I thought she didn't miss him, because I knew she did. But there was something strange in how quickly the questions stopped, as if they hadn't faded so much as been redirected somewhere else. Around the same time, she started talking more and more about her new friend, Emily. At first, I didn't think much of the name. Imaginary friends usually have names. It would have been weirder if she'd just said, "my friend forever," and left it at that. Emily seemed harmless enough. Safe, sweet, even. The kind of name you could easily imagine attached to an invisible little girl in a storybook dress. My daughter talked about her every afternoon. Emily liked pink lemonade more than tea, apparently, though she still attended tea parties out of politeness. Emily was very good at hopscotch and always knew where to hide. Emily didn't like loud television. Emily didn't want to play in the garage. Emily said the backyard was better in the evening than in the morning. That last one stuck with me for some reason, though I couldn't have said why. I laughed along, asked the occasional question, tried to sound interested without encouraging it too much. My wife was less concerned than I was. She said it was normal, especially after losing Maxie. Maybe our daughter just needed someone to fill the empty space beside her. Someone who listened all the time, agreed with her all the time, stayed exactly where she needed them. And honestly, that explanation made sense. At least for a while. Then, one evening, I came home from work and found her sitting alone in the living room, with her tea set spread across the carpet in front of her. The little plastic cups were arranged in a perfect circle. One extra place setting had been laid out opposite her, complete with the tiny pink saucer and spoon. She was dressed in the princess outfit we'd bought her the previous Christmas, a cheap blue gown with glitter stitched into the bodice and a silver plastic tiara sliding sideways into her hair. It should have been cute. It should have been one of those moments that makes you stop in the doorway and smile before reaching for your phone to take a picture. Instead, the whole room felt wrong. She was sitting very still, not sad, not dreamy, angry. Her little face was set hard, lips pressed tight, eyes bright with the kind of hurt that had already turned into blame by the time I walked in. "Emily told me Maxie isn't coming back," she said. Not cried, not asked, said. I stopped dead in the doorway. My bag slipped off my shoulder and hit the floor with a thud I barely heard. "She said you lied," my daughter went on, her voice trembling but sharp. "She said Maxie didn't run away and that he's never coming back." For a second, I couldn't think, couldn't even breathe properly. It felt like every sound in the house had dropped away. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the television from the next room, the traffic outside. Gone. "Honey, no," I said finally, and even to my own ears it sounded weak. "Daddy would never lie to you about something like that. Come here. Let me." Then the rest of what she'd said finally caught up with me. "Wait," I said. "Who is Emily?" Her face scrunched up instantly, anger collapsing into the sort of wounded outrage only children can manage. "You know who Emily is, you big fat meanie," she cried. "She's my best friend since you took Maxie." The words hit harder than if she'd screamed. "Since you took Maxie, not since he left." Not since he ran away. Since you took him." Before I could say anything else, she jumped to her feet so fast the tea set rattled. "Come on, Emily," she shouted toward the hallway. "Let's go play somewhere else." Then she ran to her bedroom, and a second later, I heard her door slam shut. I stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by tiny plastic teacups and a chair pulled out for someone who wasn't there. And I felt colder than I should have in my own house. My first thought was my wife. I figured she must have slipped somehow, mentioned the truth on the phone to a friend, said too much within earshot. Maybe our daughter heard just enough to fill in the gaps herself. That had to be it. It had to be something normal, something stupid and human and fixable. But when I asked her, she denied it before I could even finish the question. "Yeah, she's been talking like that since she got home from school," my wife said, standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in one hand, like we were discussing a phase with cartoons or picky eating. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Don't worry. Right, because that was clearly the part I was worried about. Our daughter avoided me the rest of the night. She wouldn't sit next to me at dinner, wouldn't answer me unless she absolutely had to. When I asked about school, she shrugged. When I told her to brush her teeth, she did it without looking at me. I have never felt so completely shut out by another person, let alone my own child. And still, even then, I couldn't tell her the truth. That's the part that disgusts me now. I had the moment. More than one. I could have sat on the edge of her bed and told her what happened. I could have let her hate me honestly instead of fearing me for reasons I didn't understand. But every time I imagined saying the words out loud, I froze. So I did what cowards do. I followed the routine, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, switched on her nightlight. She didn't kiss me back, didn't say goodnight. Just stared past me toward the corner of the room near the closet, as though someone was standing there waiting for me to leave. When I turned to check, there was nothing there. That night, after my wife had gone to sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling with 100 different versions of the truth running through my head. None of them sounded right. None of them sounded survivable. But I promised myself that I would tell her the next evening, no matter what. Ready or not. I owed her that much. More than that, probably. But at least that. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was my wife shaking me so hard my teeth knocked together. "Roxy's gone," she screamed. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. "What?" "She's not in her room," my wife said, already crying. I checked her bed. I checked the bathroom. I looked everywhere. For 1 second, I didn't understand the words. Then my body moved before my mind caught up. I was out of bed, down the hallway, into our daughter's room. Empty. Bed covers thrown back. Window still latched. Closet open. Nightlight glowing softly over a room that looked too normal. Then the panic hit all at once. We searched the house first. Every room, every corner, under beds, in cabinets, behind shower curtains, inside the laundry room, even though there was nowhere a child could realistically hide for long. My wife was calling her name over and over. I was checking locks, windows, doors, trying to think of when we had last seen her, whether either of us had heard anything, whether someone could have come in. Then I saw that the back door was unlocked. I don't remember opening it. I just remember the cold air outside and the wet grass under my feet as I ran into the yard. We found her almost immediately. She was kneeling at the far end of the backyard in her pink Hello Kitty pajamas, facing the jacaranda tree. At first, from a distance, I thought she was just sitting in the dirt. Then I realized what she was kneeling over. Maxie's grave had been dug up. The patch of earth we had smoothed over so carefully was torn apart, dirt piled around the hole in damp clumps. Beside it, on the grass, lay what was left of him. Even now I don't want to describe it, but I see time. Fur sloughed away in patches. Small bones visible through darkened flesh. The body collapsed in on itself in places where it had already broken down. Maggots moving in the open parts of him with a horrible, calm industry. The smell hit me a second later and nearly made me choke. My daughter was looking down at him as if she were trying to understand something she had been told and had finally been made to see for herself. I ran to her and scooped her up on instinct. The second I touched her, she started fighting, not just squirming. Fighting. She screamed and kicked and clawed at my arms with a desperation I had never felt from her before, like I was the danger and she needed to get away from me. I almost dropped her. My wife came running up behind me, sobbing, and together we tried to calm her down while standing a few feet away from the open grave and that terrible, ruined little body. I kept saying her name, kept telling her it was okay, even though nothing about that moment was okay or ever would be again. Finally, my wife took her from me. Our daughter buried her face against her mother's shoulder and cried in hard, ragged breaths until the screaming slowed enough for words. I was still standing there, hands filthy with dirt and something worse, staring at the grave when she spoke. Her voice was small, clear, utterly certain. "Why did Emily show me and not you?" I looked at my wife. My wife looked at me. Neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say. I wanted to tell myself our daughter had found the grave by accident. That she'd gone outside, remembered where we spent time in the yard that day, dug until she found what grief had already taught her to expect. I wanted to tell myself she had overheard more than we thought, that Emily was just the name she'd given to her own suspicion, her own anger, her own loneliness. But that doesn't explain what happened next. Later that morning, after we had cleaned her up and wrapped Maxie's remains in an old towel and reburied him somewhere she couldn't find again, I went into her room to sit with her. She was cross-legged on the bed, clutching one of Maxie's old chew toys in both hands. I sat slowly in the desk chair by the window and told her I needed to explain something. I told her Daddy had made a bad mistake. I told her I had hurt Maxie. I told her I was sorry before I even finished the sentence because I couldn't stand the look on her face as she listened. She cried. Of course she cried, but what scared me was that she didn't seem surprised. Not really, just heartbroken in a way that suggested she had already known and had only been waiting for me to catch up. When I was done, when I had run out of words and excuses and apologies, she wiped her nose on her sleeve and asked me one question. "Do you want to know what Emily looks like?" Everything in me went tight. I should have said no. I should have changed the subject, or hugged her, or called a therapist, or done any one of the 1,000 sensible things an adult should do when a grieving child starts talking about an invisible friend with too much confidence. Instead, I heard myself ask, very quietly, "What does she look like?" My daughter looked toward the bedroom door, not dramatically, not like she was trying to scare me, just naturally, the way you look at a person standing in the room with you. "She looks like me," she said, "but dirty." I didn't move. "She has my pajamas," she continued, "the old purple ones with the stars on them, and her hair is tangled, and she's always wet on one side." My mouth had gone dry. "Wet how?" My daughter shrugged. "Like the ground." Then she smiled, just a little, not because she was happy, but because she seemed relieved to finally be sharing something she thought I should have known already. "She knew where Maxie was because she saw you put him there." I can still hear the way she said it. Simple, matter of fact, no mystery in it at all. I asked her when Emily first came. She said 2 weeks ago. The night after Maxie disappeared. She said Emily had been outside her window. At first, crouched in the flower bed watching the house. She didn't come in until later. My daughter said she thought Emily looked lonely, so she invited her inside. After that, Emily kept showing up after school, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in the backyard, once sitting at the kitchen table when no one else was home yet. "Why didn't you tell us what she looked like before?" I asked. She looked at me as if the answer were obvious. "Because you don't like her." That was bad enough. Then she added, "She doesn't like you either." My wife wanted to treat the whole thing as trauma, grief, guilt in the house, a child trying to process a sudden loss, and a lie she probably sensed long before she could prove it. In daylight, with coffee in your hand and bills on the counter and the neighbor mowing his lawn next door, that explanation almost worked. It was practical, safe, human. Then nighttime came. Around 9, after we'd kept every light in the house on and let our daughter fall asleep between us on the couch before carrying her to bed, I went into the backyard to check the new grave. I brought a flashlight with me. The grass was damp. The dirt mound was intact. No sign of digging. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then I swept the beam toward the jacaranda tree. There were small footprints in the soft soil. Bare feet, not mine, not my wife's, not my daughter's, unless she had somehow gone outside again without us noticing. They began near the old grave and stopped halfway across the yard. Not faded, not turned away, stopped, as if whoever made them had simply ceased to exist in the middle of the grass. I didn't tell my wife. I covered them with the hose and went back inside and locked the door. For the next few days, our daughter spoke less about Emily. But that didn't make me feel better. It made me feel watched. Sometimes I would come home from work and find one extra cup on the tea set, a second indentation on the couch cushion beside our daughter, her bedroom door opening slowly after I passed it, though the air in the hallway was still. Once I heard her laughing in her room and paused outside to listen. There were two voices. One was hers. The other was quieter, too low to make out words. It stopped the instant. The floorboard under my foot creaked. I opened the door so hard it slammed against the wall. She was alone, sitting on the floor, looking up at me with a calm expression that made my skin crawl. "Emily says you should knock," she said. After that, I started checking locks twice, then 3 times. I stopped going into the backyard after dark. My wife told me I was feeding the situation, making it bigger by acting scared. Maybe she was right, but every time I tried to act normal, something tiny happened that made normal feel impossible. A cold spot in the hallway outside our daughter's room. The smell of wet dirt in the laundry room. Mud flecked along the inside windowsill, though the window was locked. And always, this growing sense that the lie had done more than hurt our daughter. It had made room for something. Maybe that thing was only guilt. Maybe guilt can change the shape of a house if you give it enough time. Maybe it can sit at your child's tea party and whisper truths you were too weak to say aloud. Maybe it can dig up what you buried and lay it at your feet. Or maybe something else had heard my daughter crying for the dog we took from her and answered in the only way it knew how. I still don't know. What I do know is this. A week after we found Maxie's grave open, my daughter stopped talking about Emily altogether. Just stopped. No farewell, no explanation, no tears over a missing friend, nothing. I asked once, carefully, where Emily had gone. My daughter looked down at her cereal and said, "She said I don't need her anymore." That should have made me feel better. Instead, I asked, "Why not?" She lifted the spoon to her mouth and said, "Because now you know what you did." Then she went back to eating. We moved 6 months later. New house, new school district, no backyard. No tree. My daughter is older now, old enough that she doesn't remember every detail. Or at least she says she doesn't. She remembers Maxie. She remembers being told he ran away. She remembers finding out that wasn't true. But when I once asked her, very gently, whether she remembered Emily, she gave me a strange look and said, "I remember you being scared of an empty room." Maybe that's all it was. Maybe grief gave her an imaginary friend, and guilt gave me a haunting. That would be easier to live with. But every now and then, usually when the house is quiet and rain has just started outside, I wake in the middle of the night with the smell of wet soil in my nose. And once, not long ago, I passed my daughter's room and saw a shape sitting on the floor beside her bed. Small, still. Head tilted toward me, I froze. Then lightning flashed through the window, and the room was empty. I stood there for a long time after that, staring into the dark, listening to my daughter breathe. Just before I walked away, I heard something from inside the room. Soft enough that I almost convinced myself it came from the rain. A little girl's voice, calm, patient. She told you first. Story 4. I'm old now, and maybe that's the only reason I'm writing any of this down. When you get to 85, people start treating you like a quiet piece of furniture in the corner of the room. They stop asking what you remember. They stop imagining you might still have things inside you worth saying. But the truth is, age doesn't empty a man out. It packs him full. Regrets, memories, old vows, old sins, things he thought time had buried. They all stay put. They get heavier, if anything. And when you start to feel your own body slipping, when getting out of a chair takes planning, and your heart stutters just enough at night to remind you that it can stop whenever it pleases, you begin to think about things you once dismissed. God. Judgment, whether a life can be measured, honestly, whether one terrible act, even if done for what felt like the right reason, follows you somewhere after the lights go out. I was never a religious man. Not properly. I went to church when I was young because my mother would box my ears if I didn't. I bowed my head when other people prayed. I said the right things at funerals. But belief, real belief, was always something I assumed belonged to other people. People who needed structure. People who needed comfort. I had Mimi, and that was enough for me. Maybe that's why I'm writing this now. Because I don't know what I believe. Because I'm close enough to the end to feel it breathing on me. Because my wife is already halfway elsewhere, and I don't know if she'll reach whatever waits beyond this life carrying the truth or only the wound. I think I'm writing this for both of us. Mimi couldn't understand it now, even if I read every word aloud to her. The doctors say Alzheimer's in careful voices, in practiced tones, as if naming a thing politely makes it less cruel. They diagnosed her 2 weeks after her 81st birthday. I remember the exact date, because our son had brought a cake over, and she stared at the candles too long before blowing them out, as though she had forgotten what they were for. 2 weeks later, a young doctor in a tie too bright for his face sat us down and told us what was happening. We didn't need him to tell us. Well, I didn't. I saw it before we ever set foot in the hospital. It began with names, small things, easy things to forgive if you loved someone enough. She'd call our son by her father's name. She'd call me by her brother's. Once she called the mailman by the name of a boy she'd gone to school with in 1954. She'd pause after doing it, her eyes narrowing, and for a second you could see her trying to climb back toward herself. Sometimes she made it. Sometimes she laughed it off. Sometimes she got angry, not at me, not at anyone, just at the fact that her own mind had betrayed her in some tiny public way. Then came the wandering. That was when I knew. People use that word gently, Wandering. It sounds harmless, like a child drifting through a garden, distracted by butterflies. It sounds confused and innocent. What Mimi did was not that. There was purpose in it. She got out of bed in the middle of the night with the same focus she used to have when checking a recipe she knew by heart but didn't trust anyone else to follow. She would slip out of the room in her nightgown, barefoot on the hall floor, and go to one specific place. The shed. Always the shed. I would wake and find her side of the bed empty, and even before I got up, I'd know where she'd gone. I'd pull on my robe, go out the back door, and see the light in there already on. She never switched it off behind her. Just stood inside beneath that weak yellow bulb, staring at the same spot on the concrete floor. The exact spot where the man had bled out. At first I told myself it was chance. Some buried instinct drawing her to a familiar structure on the property. Maybe she remembered storing tools there. Maybe she remembered the smell of fertilizer in spring. Maybe her body knew the route better than her failing mind did. But it kept happening, again and again. And each time she stood in the same place, looking down at the floor with a face so blank it unsettled me more than tears would have. I used to think, even in her state, there would be some visible emotion. Fear, disgust, grief, confusion, something. But there was nothing at first. Just stillness. A terrible, measuring stillness, as though some part of her was listening through the floorboards. I told myself she didn't understand what she was doing. That lie lasted about a week. The fifth time, maybe the sixth, I found her there again. It was close to 3 a.m, cold enough that my breath showed in the air. She was standing in her thin nightgown, one hand resting on the old workbench, the other hanging at her side. I said her name softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and looked at me, and I knew. It wasn't some miracle of recovery. I'm not foolish enough to say that. But there was recognition in her face, not broad, not complete, but sharp in one narrow place, like a beam of light making it through a cracked door. She knew something. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the whole shape of her own past. But she knew enough. She knew something terrible had happened to her. She knew it had happened there. And by the way she looked at me, long and hard and without confusion, I believed she knew I had answered it in the only way I knew how. Then she spoke his name, clear as a church bell. Not slurred, not broken, not uncertain. His name, exactly as it had been said all those years ago. And for one split second, she sounded like herself again. My Mimi, not the woman who forgot where cups went, or how old her son was, but the girl I married at 19, with a flower pinned in her hair and a look in her eye that made me believe the world had a decent future in it. It shook me so badly I had to grip the doorframe. From that moment on, every doctor's appointment became its own kind of torture. I'd sit beside her in those white rooms while she answered questions she couldn't follow, and part of me was grieving honestly. I held her hand. I watched her struggle for words. I saw humiliation flare in her when a nurse asked what season it was, or who the current president was, and she turned to me as though I might whisper the answer and spare her. But there was another part of me too, a selfish, ugly part. I kept waiting to see whether she would say anything, whether she would suddenly fix those cloudy eyes on the doctor and begin talking about that night. About the man, about me, about the shed. I didn't know what I wanted. That's the truth of it, and maybe the ugliest truth in all this. Some days I wanted her to tell them. I wanted it dragged out into the open after nearly 50 years. I wanted the waiting to end. I wanted someone else to hold the knowledge for a while, to look at me and say what I was. Murderer, avenger, husband, animal. I didn't much care which. Other days I wanted silence. I wanted the secret to stay where it had always been, between us and the dirt under that shed. I wanted to keep pretending that what I had done belonged to another version of me, a younger man with stronger hands and simpler ideas about justice. I still don't know which of those desires was stronger. What I do know is that I do not feel sorry for killing him. I have examined that from every side available to a man over the course of decades, and the answer has never changed. I feel fear. I feel shame. I feel the weight of it. But remorse? No, not for him. Mimi was good. I don't mean that in the soft, saintly way people speak at funerals when they're smoothing over the rough edges of the dead. I mean, she was genuinely good. She was kind without making a performance of it. She remembered birthdays other people forgot. She fed neighbors before they asked for help. She had a way of looking at you when you were hurting that made you feel she had quietly moved some of your burden onto her own back. Then that man took something from her, not all at once, and not in a way anyone else could see immediately. That's the worst part of such things. The world expects visible ruin, bruises, torn clothes, public collapse. But often what gets taken is inward. The sense of safety, the natural shape of a person, the easy trust they used to carry into a room. He changed her. She still laughed after that, still cooked, still smiled for pictures, still raised our boy and planted tomatoes and folded laundry and came to bed beside me every night. But there was a part of her that never came all the way back, a dimming, a watchfulness. Sometimes she would freeze at certain sounds. Sometimes she would check the lock twice. Sometimes I would reach for her in bed and feel her body tense for half a second before she remembered it was me. No court would have fixed that. No sentence would have undone it. And as it turned out, there was hardly any sentence to speak of anyway. He denied it, of course. Men like that always do. He had a clean smile, decent clothes, a wife in another town, and just enough charm to make people doubt the woman instead of the man. There was talk, there were statements, there were sympathetic looks from people who wanted very much to be seen as sympathetic without doing anything that might inconvenience them. In the end, there was no real justice, not the kind that meant anything. He kept living. That was what ate at me. He kept walking around in the same daylight as the rest of us, buying groceries, laughing with men outside the hardware store, filling his truck with gas, existing as though he hadn't put his hands on my wife and left part of her trapped in that night forever. I did not plan it all at once. That would be neater than the truth. The truth is I thought about him for months, maybe longer. I pictured confronting him. I pictured beating him bloody in a parking lot. I pictured dragging him to the sheriff's office and forcing the whole rotten county to look directly at what it had chosen to ignore. But every version ended with him still breathing, still capable of carrying on. Then one evening Mimi told me, very calmly, it would help me move on. I looked at her and she kept her eyes on her hands. I need to see it, she said. She didn't have to explain what she meant. We never spoke of it directly again, at least not with those exact words. But the understanding was there from that moment forward, terrible and clear and alive between us. People want to believe murders happen in fits of madness or rage. Mine didn't. Mine happened in the cool space where love curdles into purpose. I told him I needed help moving some equipment. He knew me. That's what still turns my stomach. He trusted the invitation because the world had already taught him he would be allowed to move through it without consequence. He came in the late afternoon, just before dark, when the shed would have some privacy from the road. I had a shovel ready, even writing that makes my hand shake, not because I regret it, but because memory preserves strange details. The wood handle was splintered near the middle. I had meant to sand it down weeks before. There was a spiderweb in the upper corner of the shed, silver in the low light. He ducked his head to step inside and asked where the equipment was. I hit him before he finished the sentence. The first blow didn't kill him. Life isn't tidy that way. It knocked him down. He made a sound I still hear sometimes in my dreams, more surprise than pain. He looked up at me, and I saw comprehension arrive one piece at a time. He tried to speak. I hit him again and again. I don't know how many times. Fewer than it feels like. More than I want to admit. At some point he was no longer defending himself. At some point he was no longer really there. But I kept going until I was sure. Until the body on the floor had no future in it. Mimi watched. She stood in the doorway of the shed, with both hands clasped in front of her, white-knuckled and trembling. There were tears on her face, but she did not look away. Not once. I think that is part of why the memory has never loosened its grip on me. She had asked for it. Needed it, she said. But witnessing a thing and being freed by it are not the same. When it was done, there was blood on the concrete, and on my shirt, and on the toes of my boots. The smell was metallic and warm and immediate. I turned to her, breathing hard, waiting for some sign that it had changed something. She looked smaller, not relieved, not healed, just smaller. We buried him ourselves that night, though not far. We didn't have the strength or time for some elaborate disposal. The shed had a dirt section under the far shelf where an old drain trench had collapsed years before. I dug until my hands blistered, and we put him there. Later, I poured new concrete over part of it. Told anyone who asked that I was finally fixing the floor. Nobody ever came looking hard enough. That, more than anything, taught me what kind of world this is. People disappear all the time if the right people don't value them enough to ask where they went. Mimi never moved on. That may be the one punishment I was not prepared for. I thought removing him from the world might close the wound or at least keep it from festering. I thought seeing him dead might give her some kind of end point, a line after which healing could begin. But the mind does not obey blood. Trauma is not a debt you settle by collecting another. She lived. We both did. We raised our son. We grew older. The seasons kept changing. And beneath all that ordinary life sat the knowledge of what we had done and why we had done it. Now, with her mind crumbling away, that buried thing has begun rising again. She goes to the shed because some part of her still knows. Some part of her stands in that doorway forever. And maybe the cruelest part of all is that she calls me by his name now. Not always, but often enough. She looks at me with those faded eyes and says his name as though I am him. As though after all these years, the line between us has worn away. The man who hurt her, the man who killed him, both tied to the same place in her memory. Both men standing over her life with power she never should have had to endure. Every time she does it, I feel something sink inside me. I have spent nearly 50 years trying not to become him in my own mind. I told myself intention mattered, love mattered, justice mattered. That what I did, however brutal, was not the same as what he did to her, and still she calls me by his name. Maybe it's the disease talking. Maybe it's random damage, neurons misfiring in an old and failing brain. Or maybe some deep, unsparing part of her sees what I have tried not to see. That violence leaves a mark not only on the victim, but on the one who commits it, no matter the reason. Maybe once you take a life with your own hands, you carry a stain that does not care about motives. I don't know. I only know that I am tired. Tired of the silence. Tired of the shed. Tired of hearing floorboards creak at night and wondering if she's gone back out there again. Tired of helping her into her chair in the morning while she looks past me as if I belong to some older, darker part of the house. So this is my confession. If confession is what it can be called, when there is no priest, no courtroom, no audience, but strangers, and whatever God may still be listening. I killed the man who raped my wife. I did it with a shovel in our shed while she watched. We buried him there. And now, as her mind loosens from the world, she keeps returning to that place as if some part of her has been waiting for me to speak plainly at last. I don't know what awaits me after death. I don't know whether heaven is real or whether hell is merely the truths you can no longer outrun. I don't know if God weighs actions or hearts or consequences, or whether all he sees is blood. But I know this much. If every tongue shall confess, then mine has. And if Mimi reaches whatever comes next before I do, I hope she reaches it as herself. Not frightened, not broken, not standing in that shed, not looking at me with his name on her lips. As for me, I suspect I will carry both names with me when I go. Story 5. The locks got rekeyed 5 days ago. I watched the locksmith do it. I stood right there in the doorway and watched him change the hardware on both the front door and the kitchen door that opens onto the back stairwell. He tests each lock twice before leaving. Then he handed me 2 new keys. I put one on my hook by the fridge, gave one to Mara, and dropped the original into the junk drawer with the batteries and takeout menus and all the other things you keep meaning to organize and never do. I remember feeling better after he left. Not safe exactly, just better, like I had finally done the adult, sensible thing. The practical thing. The thing people tell you to do when something has started to feel wrong in your own home, and you can't point to one dramatic reason why. Replace the locks. Reset the access. Start from zero. That was 5 days ago. 2 nights ago, I woke up at 1:30 in the morning, and I still don't know what woke me. There was no sharp noise, no crash, no footsteps that I could isolate after the fact. No dream I could remember dragging me into consciousness. Just that abrupt, unnatural feeling of being awake all at once, with my heart already beating too hard, and the certainty instant and complete that something was wrong. I lay still in the dark and listened. The radiator ticked the way it always does in cold weather, irregular and metallic. A car moved down the street below, tires hissing briefly over wet pavement. Through the wall, I could hear Mara's white noise machine humming in that soft ocean-like loop she uses every night. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned and settled. Nothing else. Nothing human. Nothing I could hold on to and say, there, that's what woke me. I stayed there for 20 minutes, maybe longer. It's hard to say. Time moves differently in the dark when you're waiting for proof that your fear is stupid. Every second stretches. You start measuring your own body against the room. The weight of the blanket, the dryness in your throat, the exact place where your pulse is knocking in your neck. I kept thinking that if I just stayed still enough, whatever had disturbed me would reveal itself. Another sound, a light under the door, a voice, anything. Nothing happened. Eventually, my body gave up on sleep entirely, and I got out of bed to use the bathroom. The apartment was dark, except for the weak orange wash of streetlight slipping through the blinds in the living room. I didn't turn any lights on. I know the layout well enough by now to move through it half asleep. Bedroom door, 3 steps, hallway wall on the right, bathroom just ahead. Routine. Muscle memory. I'm glad I didn't turn on a light. I've thought about that more than once, because if I had, I might have noticed it right away. And if I had noticed it right away, I would have had to react to it in real time. I would have had to decide, standing there in the dark at 1:30 in the morning, whether to search the apartment, whether to wake Mara, whether to call someone, whether to admit out loud what it looked like. Instead, I missed it, or maybe not missed it. Maybe my mind slid past it because it didn't want to know yet. When I came out of the bathroom and started back toward my room, I passed the dining area and something in my peripheral vision felt wrong. Not dramatic. Just wrong in that quiet, instinctive way your own home can go wrong when something has shifted by a few inches. I stopped walking. At first, I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. It was too dark. My eyes were still adjusting. The shapes were familiar, but off balance, like a room in a dream where the proportions are almost right, but not quite. Then I realized. The chair. We have a small dining table with 4 chairs. 3 of them stay where they belong, tucked under the table, because there isn't really enough room in the apartment for them not to. The 4th one doesn't fit neatly once the table's pushed up against the window, so it usually sits against the wall near the hallway. It has lived there for months. It's the overflow chair, the one people pile sweaters on, the one Mara throws her tote bag over when she comes in from work. That chair had been moved, not by a foot or two, not half accidentally, like someone bumped it while carrying groceries. It had been pulled into the center of the open space between the dining area and the hall, and it was facing my bedroom door. I stood there in the dark looking at it for a long time. There's a point where fear doesn't feel sharp anymore. It goes past that and becomes something quieter, denser, a kind of heavy disbelief. But my brain started producing explanations immediately, all of them bad and all of them desperate. I moved it earlier and forgot. Mara moved it while cleaning. One of us dragged it there without realizing. I stared at the angle of it, at the way the front legs lined up toward my room, and none of those explanations held. It was positioned. That's the part I keep coming back to. It wasn't just out of place. It had been placed, deliberately, facing the one part of the apartment where I would have been asleep. I didn't go closer. I didn't check the front door or the kitchen door. I didn't look into the living room or behind the coat rack or into the kitchen shadows where the countertops catch the streetlight. I wish I could say I did something smart, something decisive. But fear has a way of stripping you down to your most basic habits, and mine, apparently, is denial. I went back to bed. I climbed in slowly, like if I moved too fast, something might notice me. Then I turned over and put my back against the wall, so I was facing the bedroom door. I didn't close my eyes again. I lay there watching the rectangle of darkness that was the doorway and the softer darkness beyond it. And I stayed like that until gray light started thinning the room around me. In the morning, the chair was exactly where I had seen it. That made it worse somehow. Some part of me had apparently still hoped I'd imagined the whole thing. Mara came out of her room around 8, hair half up, still in the oversized t-shirt she sleeps in. I asked her as casually as I could whether she'd moved the dining chair during the night. She looked at me, then looked at the chair. I watched her face change. Not dramatically. Mara's not theatrical. That's one of the reasons I trust her. But something in her expression tightened and then shifted through a series of reactions too quick and too tangled to name. Confusion first, then recognition, then something close to dread. She shook her head. For a second, it looked like she was going to ask me why. Instead, she just kept looking at the chair. Then she said very gently that she thought she might stay with her boyfriend for a few days. She didn't say it like an accusation. She didn't make me feel crazy. She didn't even ask if I'd done it myself and forgotten. If anything, that was worse. It meant she had already reached some conclusion without needing the details. And Mara does not scare easily. I have seen her handle a man following us from the subway with more irritation than fear. I have seen her kill a roach with a hardcover novel without even standing up from the couch. She's the kind of person who checks weird noises instead of pretending she didn't hear them. For her to look at that chair and quietly decide to leave the apartment for a few days without argument or sarcasm or any attempt to rationalize it. That did something to me. After she left, the apartment felt larger. Not emptier, larger. Like the walls had shifted outward just enough to create room for something I hadn't noticed before. I spent that day trying to be rational. I checked the locks. Both worked. The chain was where I always leave it. The windows were latched. Nothing else in the apartment looked disturbed. No missing electronics. No open drawers. No muddy footprints. Nothing under the bed. Nothing in the closets. If someone had gotten in, moved a chair into the center of the room, and left, they had done it without touching anything else. That should have made it easier to dismiss. It didn't. A friend of mine, someone practical, sensible, the kind of person who owns tools and folders and backup chargers and always seems faintly disappointed by other people's refusal to prepare, told me to put up a camera, just a basic one, angled toward the front door and hallway. He said it was the only way to know for sure. He said whatever I saw on that footage would be better than not knowing. I ordered one that night. It arrived yesterday. I'm setting it up tonight. That should make me feel proactive, but mostly it makes me feel like I'm participating in the next step of something that has already started, and doesn't especially care whether I understand it. I've barely slept in 9 days. That's not because of the chair alone, not exactly. The chair is just the one thing I can describe cleanly, the one thing that survives daylight. There have been other moments before it. Little ones I keep trying to arrange into a pattern. The sense, once or twice, that the front door was unlocked when I was certain I'd locked it. The smell in the hall outside my room one morning, not a bad smell exactly, just stale fabric and damp skin, like someone had taken off a winter coat and left it in a closed space too long, my keys not being where I left them. And the lanyard. I don't know why I keep coming back to that. It's ridiculous, maybe. Too small to matter on its own. That's probably why I haven't mentioned it to anyone. The chair sounds strange but real. The locks sound sensible. The camera sounds practical. The lanyard makes me sound like I'm building a ghost story out of office supplies. It was hanging from the inside knob of the kitchen door the first week I moved in. Blue fabric, frayed at the edges, with a plastic clip at the end, and one of those clarity sleeves people use for work badges. No card inside, no name, just the sleeve. I assumed it belonged to the previous tenant. I left it there for 2 days thinking maybe the landlord would come get it. Then I took it down and tossed it in the junk drawer. 2 days later, it was back on the knob. That annoyed me more than anything else. I thought Mara had found it and put it back there for some reason. She said she hadn't touched it. I believed her, mostly because she seemed genuinely confused when I asked. So I threw it away properly that time, down in the trash bins behind the building. A week later, it was hanging in the coat closet, not on a hanger, not tangled with anything, hanging neatly from the little hook where I keep reusable grocery bags. Same blue strap, same empty plastic sleeve. I remember holding it and feeling not fear yet, but resistance. Like, my mind didn't want to grip the fact of it too tightly because once it did, I'd have to admit, either I was doing things without remembering or someone else had access to my apartment. I threw it away again. I didn't see it for almost a month after that. Then 3 nights before I had the locks rekeyed, I came home from work and found it on the dining table. Laid flat. Centered. The plastic sleeve turned upward like it was waiting for something to be slid inside. That was the night I called the locksmith. I told myself that was enough. A line had been crossed, even if there was some stupid explanation. Building maintenance, a former tenant with leftover access, Mara sleepwalking, me dissociating, whatever. I needed to shut the door on it, physically, before I could think clearly. So I had the locks rekeyed. I watched it happen. I watched the locksmith remove the cylinders, replace the hardware, hand me fresh keys. I watched him test each lock from both sides. I thanked him. I tipped him. I felt embarrassed by how relieved I was, and for 5 days, nothing. Then, the chair. I opened the junk drawer this morning because I wanted to prove something to myself. I'm not even sure what. That the old key was still there, maybe. That I hadn't hidden it somewhere stupid. That I was still attached to the same basic facts as the rest of the world. The old key is still there. So is the original hook tag from the locksmith. And under them, folded once, was the lanyard. I know I didn't put it there. I know how useless that sentence sounds. Everyone knows they didn't put something somewhere until they find out they did. Memory is flimsy. Sleep deprivation is worse. Stress makes patterns out of dust. I am aware of all of that. I have repeated all of it to myself in increasingly longer loops every night this week. But I didn't put it there. It was folded carefully, which is not how I would have shoved it into a drawer full of loose batteries and takeout menus and warranty cards. The clear plastic sleeve was facing outward. Empty. When I picked it up, something slid out of the sleeve and fell into the drawer beneath it. A small paper card, the kind you'd put into an ID holder. Blank on one side. On the other side, in narrow black handwriting, were 7 digits. 1:30 a.m., no date, no other words. Just the time I woke up and found the chair facing my bedroom door. I have not touched the card since. It's still in the drawer. I closed it and walked away, and have been sitting in my room for the last hour, trying to decide whether I am more afraid of what the camera might show me tonight, or of what it might fail to show. Because if there's a person doing this, then at least there are rules. Locks, entries, footage, police, a body that has to move through space and open doors and stand in rooms. If it's a person, then what I'm dealing with is terrible but ordinary. But if the camera shows nothing, if tomorrow morning I open that footage and see the chair move by itself, or the lanyard appear where I left empty space, then I lose the last explanation I know how to survive. I keep trying not to think about one other thing, the original key, the one the locksmith replaced. I put it in the drawer 5 days ago. This afternoon, when I opened the drawer and found the lanyard and the card, the key wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It was turned 90 degrees, like someone had picked it up, looked at it, and set it back down carefully. Maybe I did that. Maybe. But I can't stop thinking about how the chair was facing my bedroom, not the front door, not the hallway, me. And I can't stop thinking about the lanyard because once, weeks ago, before any of this felt worth saying out loud, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw something hanging from the inside doorknob of my room, just a darker shape against the dark, long and narrow, motionless. I remember staring at it, half asleep, telling myself it was a shadow or a sweatshirt or part of a dream. In the morning, there was nothing there. I had forgotten about that until now. Or maybe I had decided to forget it. I'm going to set up the camera tonight. I'm going to angle it at the front door in the hallway and part of the dining area if I can. And I'm going to leave the lanyard exactly where I found it. Because I need to know whether it moves. More than that, I need to know whether something in this apartment is arranging things so I will see them. Because that is what it feels like now. Not random disturbances. Not break-ins. Not ordinary misplacement. Communication. Like someone has been trying smaller things and is getting tired of being ignored. The worst part is that I think, somewhere under all the fear and the sleeplessness and the constant replaying of details, I already know why the lanyard matters. I think it belongs to whoever used to live here before me, and I think I've seen that blue strap before. not in the apartment. Around someone's neck, standing at my bedroom door. Story 6. I'm not typically one to boast about how religious I was. That kind of thing never sat right with me. People who made church their whole identity always seemed off somehow. Too polished, too eager. Like they were trying to prove something to everyone else, or maybe to themselves. That probably sounds bitter now, but I swear it isn't how I used to think. Before all this, I was a believer, a real one. I went to church twice a week. I prayed every day. I tried, honestly tried, to live in a way that would make God proud of me. I wasn't loud about it. I wasn't one of those people who quoted scripture in every conversation or turned every hardship into a sermon. I kept it private, personal. That was what faith was supposed to be, I thought. Quiet, honest. Now it all feels pointless. I come from a small town in northern Georgia, the kind of place people from outside would probably romanticize for about 5 minutes before realizing how strange it really is. One main road, a gas station, a grocery store that somehow stays open despite never seeming busy, a church at the center of everything, physically and otherwise. Population around 600, give or take. And somehow every Wednesday and Sunday, it felt like every last one of them was crammed into those pews. When you grow up in a place like that, you don't think of it as suspicious. You think of it as normal. Kids go to school, adults go to work. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody waves. Everybody asks about your mother. Church is full because church is what people do. It's routine, tradition. A rhythm so constant it stops looking like a choice. I was always a loner though. I didn't care much for crowds, even when I was sitting among people I'd known all my life. So I kept to the back, last row, usually, quiet, out of the way, while everybody else stood and swayed and sang with their hands in the air. I made myself small and watched. That was my habit, observation. I'd zone out during the music, during the opening prayers, during all those emotional little pauses people fill with amens and tears and nods. I'd study faces. That was what held my attention more than anything the preacher ever said. The way people smiled at each other, hugged, laughed, held eye contact a little too long. On the surface, it was beautiful. It looked like community should look. Warm, devoted, safe. But the longer I watched, the more it started to feel like a performance. Not always. Not in some dramatic movie villain way. Just little things. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Laughter that came half a second too late. Reactions that looked practiced. It was subtle enough that I ignored it for a long time, mostly because I figured the problem was me. I've always had a suspicious mind. I overthink. I know that about myself. Still, once you notice one false smile, you start noticing 10, then 20. Then you start seeing other things too. The money, for one. That church had more cash flowing through it than any building in a town that size should have. I watched those donation baskets go by every week. 50s, hundreds, thick folds of bills pinched between clean fingers and dropped in without hesitation. Men in expensive suits, women stepping out of new luxury SUVs in heels that would snap on our cracked sidewalks anywhere else. People who talked about humility but wore watches worth more than my truck. And me sitting in the back with my last $10 in my pocket, still dropping it in the basket because I thought that was what faith looked like. Sacrifice, trust, sincerity. I remember thinking more than once that it all felt like overcompensation. That was the word that stuck with me. Overcompensation. At the time, I couldn't have told you what I thought they were compensating for. Sin, maybe, hypocrisy, shame, something. I just knew it felt wrong. What bothers me now is how obvious it all seems in hindsight. So obvious I could hit myself for not trusting my gut sooner. The thing is, I was doing something no one else in town seemed interested in doing. I stayed after the service ended. Not every time, but often enough. I liked the quiet after everybody left. The building changed when it emptied out. It stopped being theatrical. No music, no swaying bodies, no polished greetings, no staged warmth. Just old wood, dust, stale air, colored light from the windows, and silence. That was the version of the church I loved. I'd sit in a pew by myself and pray for an hour, sometimes two. No audience, no performance. Just me and God, or what I hoped was God listening. Mostly it was peaceful, but every now and then the preacher would catch me still there. That should been normal. A preacher finding someone praying in church should be the least strange thing in the world. But every time he saw me, there was something in his face that put me on edge. He'd smile, sure. He'd speak kindly, tell me to take all the time I needed, but behind it, there was tension, a tightness. Like I had stayed too long at a party I hadn't realized was over. Like my being there after hours created a problem for him. That was the first thing that really made me wonder. The second was the door. It appeared 1 week with yellow caution tape crossed over it and a sign that read, "Do not enter." Simple as that. Nothing dramatic. No explanation. Just a door along the side hallway I'd probably never paid attention to before, suddenly marked like it led to a gas leak or a collapsed floor. And once it was marked, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Curiosity is a stupid thing when it gets hold of you. At first, I told myself it was probably something boring. Old storage, flood damage, broken plumbing. But then Sunday came, and I noticed two ushers standing near it the whole service, not casually nearby, but positioned, watching. That pushed me over the edge. The following week, I hid in the bathroom for nearly 2 hours after service ended. I waited until the last footsteps were gone, until I was certain the building had settled into silence. Then I cracked the bathroom door, peered out, and stepped into the hallway. I moved like I was trespassing in my own dream. Slow, careful. The place felt too quiet. Even the floorboards under me, old as the building itself, stayed still and silent. I reached the taped-off door and stopped. I can't explain what I felt standing there. Not properly. People use words like energy and presence too easily these days, but that's the closest I can come. There was something wrong beyond that door. Not noise, not movement, just a pressure, faint but immediate, like standing too close to a storm and feeling static in the air before the first lightning strike. I had to steady my breathing before I reached for the tape, and just as my fingers touched it, a hand settled on my shoulder. Cold, so cold I felt it through my shirt. Now, the preacher said behind me, his voice low and cracked and almost amused. What's a fine young man like yourself doing trying to break into a closed-off part of my church? I nearly came out of my skin. His grip tightened as I stumbled over an answer. I started denying it before I even knew what I was denying, just trying to get words out fast enough to fill the panic rising in my throat. He laughed softly, not warmly, not kindly, just softly. "Oh, I have no doubt," he said. "You don't strike me as the rule-breaking type." Then his tone changed. He loosened his grip for a second, then tightened it again, like he wanted me to understand the difference. "You're free to stay here as long as you'd like," he said. "Pray to the sky, cry your eyes out, beg forgiveness, whatever helps you sleep at night. But, listen, son." He leaned a little closer. "You cannot go in there, you understand? Signs there for a reason." I nodded so fast it made my neck hurt. He smiled again, but his eyes stayed hard. "Now that you've proven I've got to keep an eye on you, me and you are gonna sit here together. You worship all you want. Just do it quickly. I got a wife to get home to." I lasted maybe 5 minutes after that. I went back into the sanctuary and sat in a pew while he took the row behind me. I could feel him watching the back of my head the entire time. I tried to pray, but my mind was useless by then. All I could think about was that door and the way his hand had felt on my shoulder, and the fact that a preacher had looked more like a guard than a shepherd. When I finally left, I knew I wasn't done. This stopped being curiosity that day. It became proof. I needed proof that something was wrong in that church, because everything in me had already decided it was. For the next few weeks, I watched and waited. The door stayed under some kind of supervision almost constantly. Sometimes it was the preacher, sometimes the ushers, sometimes just random men from town standing nearby too casually, pretending to chat while keeping that hallway in view. It almost would have been funny if it hadn't made my skin crawl. The services themselves got harder to sit through after that. Every smile looked faker. Every hymn sounded hollower. Every donation basket felt heavier. I started seeing the whole town differently. All those polished cars outside. All those expensive clothes. All those people lifting their hands like they loved God more than life itself while dropping enough cash in the basket to pay someone's rent for a month. It didn't feel generous anymore. It felt compulsory, like dues, like hush money. Then finally, something happened, a snowstorm. A real one, the kind Georgia towns don't know how to handle because they happen just rarely enough to feel biblical every time. It was all anybody talked about that week. Roads shutting down, power lines freezing, people stocking bread and milk like the end times were coming. The forecast said it would start late Sunday night. I saw my chance immediately. That Sunday, I stayed hidden again. I waited until the building emptied, until the sun dropped, until the first flakes started falling outside the stained glass windows. I watched them thicken from a drift into a sheet. By the time I moved, I was certain I was alone. The church felt different in the snow. Smaller, somehow. Sealed off. The silence outside pressed against the building until even my breathing sounded rude. I walked to the taped-off door and felt that same wrongness waiting on the other side. This time I didn't bother being careful. I tore the tape away in one hard pull and grabbed the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. I kicked the door once. Pain shot up my leg. Twice. The frame groaned. 3 times, and the wood splintered near the latch. The door sagged inward and creaked open. There were stairs behind it. Concrete stairs descending into darkness, and at the bottom, faint but unmistakable, was a blue glow. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to walk out of the church, drive home, and let whatever lived down there stay buried. But fear had been building in me for too long by then. Fear becomes momentum if you feed it enough. So I went down, step by step. The air got colder with each one. Not just basement cold, sharper than that. The kind of cold that seems to crawl into your sleeves and up your spine. Halfway down, I started hearing something too, a low, steady buzzing. Mechanical. Not loud, but constant, like a bank of fans running somewhere ahead. When I reached the bottom, I just stood there and stared. Because it wasn't what I expected. No candles, no altar, no symbols painted in blood, no occult chamber. What I found was worse because it was ordinary. Rows of computers, monitors, towers, hard drives, filing cabinets, shelves packed with labeled binders, tables covered in external storage and printed spreadsheets. The blue glow came from screensavers and power lights scattered across the room. The hum I'd heard was cooling fans and server noise. The whole basement looked less like a church secret and more like the back office of a surveillance company. For a second, I couldn't make sense of it. Then I got closer, and then I understood. Names. Spreadsheets full of names, folders full of records, audio files labeled by date, photographs, scanned documents, police reports that should have been sealed or destroyed, confessions, some written, some recorded, evidence, not on a few people, on everybody. It was all there in neat categories, like somebody had spent years building a private archive of every sin, crime, scandal, and secret in town. Petty theft, assault, fraud, domestic violence, embezzlement, hit and runs, affairs, missing funds, illegal gun possession. Things I could almost imagine people recovering from if dragged into the light. Then worse things. Much worse. And next to every name was a number. At first I thought it was a date or some filing code. Then I opened enough files to understand. It was debt. What they owed. Not to God. To the church. That was the moment everything locked into place. The donations. The wealth. The fake devotion. The packed pews. The strained smiles. These people weren't giving out of faith. They were paying to keep the church silent. Paying for sins to remain hidden. Paying to have records buried, witnesses managed, histories scrubbed clean. The whole town wasn't built around belief. It was built around leverage. I started searching names I knew. The first one I looked for was Thomas O'Brien, because everybody in town knew Thomas. Big man, big house, biggest donor in the church by a mile. The kind of guy who always slapped your back too hard and spoke like he owned whatever ground he was standing on. His file made me sick. Kidnapping, hostage situation, 6-hour police standoff. His wife had tried to leave him over an affair with one of his employees. According to the documents in front of me, he locked the family inside their own home, held them there at gunpoint, and when police finally breached the place, his wife was dead from a gunshot wound to the head. He was supposed to serve 25 to life. Supposed to. Instead, somewhere between sentencing and reality, everything vanished. Charges dissolved. Records erased. The town kept moving like none of it had happened. All he had to do was pay. I kept going. Amber Winslow, always dressed like she'd walked out of a dealership commercial, stepping out of a fresh Mercedes every Sunday, and smiling like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. $200 in the basket, sometimes more. Money laundering, theft, illegal firearm possession. And then I found the preacher's file. I think some part of me expected his to be empty, not because I trusted him by then, but because I had to believe there was a ceiling somewhere. That the man running this machine had at least risen from ordinary corruption, that maybe he was greedy, maybe cruel, but not rotten all the way through. I was wrong. Sexual assault, assault and battery, kidnapping, torture, interfering with government operations, trafficking. The list kept going. He had moved to our town after serving time elsewhere, and even then the number attached to his name was enormous, still sitting above 7 digits, which meant he wasn't outside the system he'd built. He was part of it, maybe even owned by it as much as anyone else. That was when I understood the church wasn't protecting sinners, it was collecting them, holding them together in one place, bound by mutual guilt and payment and silence. A congregation built not on faith, but on blackmail. I was still staring at the screen when the power went out. The room dropped into blackness so complete it felt physical. Every monitor died at once. Every little blue light vanished. The hum of the machines cut off, and the silence after it was enormous. I remember thinking stupidly, snowstorm. Just that. Snowstorm took the power. I reached for my phone. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured, descending. I froze so hard it hurt. No light, no sound except those steps coming down one by one through the dark. I couldn't tell how far away the person was, only that they were getting closer. My eyes were useless. The blackness in that basement was total. I held my breath and listened to the soft scrape of shoes on concrete steps until the sound stopped directly in front of me. I could make out a shape then, just a silhouette, human-sized, motionless. Before I could move, a hand landed on my shoulder, firm, cold enough to go through my shirt. A scream rose in me, but another hand clamped over my mouth before it could come out. And then, close to my ear, calm as Sunday morning, the preacher said, "I thought I told you not to come down here, son." He sounded almost disappointed. That was the worst part. Not angry, not shocked, not panicked that his secret had been found. Just disappointed. Like I had forced him into something inconvenient. I thrashed once on instinct, and his grip tightened so hard on my shoulder, I felt pain flash all the way down my arm. The hand over my mouth smelled faintly of aftershave and cold metal. I could hear him breathing, slow, controlled. Not a man caught off guard, a man fully at ease. Then another sound came from the top of the stairs. More footsteps, several this time. Not rushing, not chaotic, ordered. Coming down. He hadn't come alone. That was when terror stopped feeling sharp and became hopeless. It spread through me heavy and numb because I understood, all at once, what this place really was. Not just storage, not just secrets, infrastructure, community. Everybody with something to lose, bound to the same machine. If I disappeared in that basement, the next Sunday every pew would still be full. Hymns would still be sung. Hands would still be raised. Donation baskets would still pass from row to row, and the whole town would keep smiling. I think he felt the change in me. He leaned closer. "You should have stayed in your seat," he whispered. The men coming down the stairs didn't speak. I could only hear their shoes and the soft shift of fabric as they moved into the room around us. More silhouettes. A tightening circle in the dark. My mind started attaching names to shapes without permission. Ushers, deacons. Men who shook my hand every Sunday. Men who asked about my mama. Men who said, "God bless you," when I sneezed. I tried to bite his palm. It was useless. He yanked my head back hard enough to make my neck pop. "Don't embarrass yourself," he said. Then the lights came back. Not all at once, a stagger. Emergency strips first, then a weak return of power that left half the basement in shadow and the other half in a sickly, buzzing glow. There were 6 of them. The preacher still behind me. 3 ushers. 2 men from town I recognized instantly, both of them regulars in the front pew. Both of them the sort of men people described as pillars of the community. Nobody looked surprised to see me. That's what I remember most. Not one of them wore the expression of someone interrupted in a secret operation. They looked tired, annoyed, maybe resigned. Like this was a mess they had hoped to avoid, but had always known was possible. My eyes flicked to the nearest computer, still trying to decide whether there was chance I could grab something, take a picture, send a file, do anything useful before they dragged me out of there. The preacher followed my gaze and smiled, a small smile. "There's your problem," he said softly. "Still thinking truth matters once enough people agree to bury it." He removed his hand from my mouth, but the one on my shoulder remained. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe because I understood screaming in that room would be like praying into a locked box. Nobody was going to hear anything I said who wasn't already part of it. "What is this?" I asked, and my own voice sounded thin. One of the ushers actually laughed. The preacher answered. "This," he said, "is why this town works." He gestured with his free hand toward the rows of files and monitors. "This town stays peaceful because everyone knows what everyone stands to lose. Sin confessed to God is one thing. Sin documented is another. Accountability is a fine motivator. That's blackmail. That's order," he said. I looked at the men around him. None of them flinched. "How many people know?" He gave me a long look, and I saw genuine amusement creep into his face. "How many people do you think are in those pews?" I wish I could say I lunged at him then. That I swung at somebody, flipped a table, broke a screen, did something brave and stupid and cinematic. What I did was stand there and finally understand how alone I was. Not lonely. Alone. That town I had grown up in. Those people I had watched and judged from the back pew. All those fake smiles and expensive donations and polished shoes. I had thought I was observing a community with cracks in it. I was wrong. The cracks were the foundation. I asked him what they were going to do to me. He tilted his head, almost kindly. "That depends," he said, "on whether you've still got enough faith to understand forgiveness." I laughed then. I couldn't help it. It came out ugly and breathless and close to hysteria. "Forgiveness?" I said. "You think this has anything to do with God?" For the first time, his face hardened completely. "No," he said. "This has to do with people. God was just how we got them in one room." I don't remember who hit me first. One of the ushers, I think. A blunt flash of pain at the side of my head that sent me sideways into a desk. My shoulder clipped a monitor, and it toppled, sparks snapping from the back when it hit the floor. Then hands were on me from every direction, grabbing my arms, my shirt, the back of my neck. I fought then, but badly. Wildly. Fear makes you clumsy. I remember knees striking concrete, my cheek scraping the floor, somebody cursing, somebody else saying not to mark my face, not to mark my face, as if they were worried how it would look on Sunday. They dragged me to a chair at the far end of the room and sat me in it hard. Zip ties bit into my wrists. One of the men I'd known since childhood avoided looking me in the eye while he tightened them. The preacher crouched in front of me. "You are not the first young man to mistake curiosity for righteousness," he said. "And you won't be the last." I spat at him. It hit his cheek. Nobody moved for half a second. Then he wiped it away with his thumb and stood. "Leave him," he said. They did. Not all at once, but one by one. Back up the stairs, past the humming computers, past the shelves and files and screens that held the rot of the whole town. The preacher was last. He paused at the bottom step and looked back at me. "You wanted to be close to God in his househead," he said. "Now you can stay as long as you like." Then he switched off the basement lights again and shut the door. I sat there in the dark for hours, maybe longer. The power flickered on and off through the storm, giving me brief windows of blue-white visibility between stretches of black. Enough to see the rows of machines. Enough to see the file cabinets. Enough to see the blood I'd left on the floor from where my head had split against the desk. Enough to understand they were not planning to rush back. I worked one hand loose eventually. I don't know how. Panic, sweat, luck. I scraped skin off half my wrist getting free, then the other. By then my fingers were numb and clumsy, but I managed the stairs, managed the ruined door, managed the sanctuary. The church above looked exactly the same as it always had. Pews, cross, piano, soft emergency lights. A holy place with a basement full of leverage. Outside, the snow had piled high enough to swallow the steps. The whole town was white and silent. No cars, no people, no sign that anything had happened beneath that building at all. I made it home. That part almost sounds like a victory when I write it plainly. It wasn't. Because what do you do with something like this when the sheriff sits 3 pews from the front every Sunday? When half the town is in those files and the other half depends on the silence. When every person you could tell has either paid into the system or profited from it. I left, not that night, not dramatically, but soon. I packed what I could, told nobody where I was going, and drove south before dawn on the first clear road. I never went back. Sometimes I think I should taken proof, a file, a photo, anything, but I know the truth. proof only matters if there's somewhere safe to carry it. And maybe that's why I'm writing this now. Because faith is dead in me, but fear isn't. Fear stayed. Fear adapted. Fear wakes up with me and sits at the edge of the bed when the room is still dark. Fear reminds me that I never told anyone publicly, never dragged that church into the light, never blew the whole thing open. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me practical. Maybe those are the same thing. All I know is this. If you ever find yourself in a small town where every pew is full, where every smile looks just a little too rehearsed, where generosity seems strangely expensive, and devotion feels more like obligation than love, do not assume you're imagining it. And if a preacher ever tells you not to open a door in God's house, listen to the fear in his voice, not the kindness in his words. Because sometimes the devil isn't under the church. Sometimes he's the reason it stays open.